Tariffs have returned to the forefront of economic debate since Donald Trump won the U.S. election and revived them as both a negotiation tool and a way to address trade imbalances. His policy of economic nationalism draws inspiration from the 19th century, when tariffs were a defining feature of U.S. trade policy, funding the government, protecting industries, and keeping income tax at zero. If tariffs helped build the American economy once, could they do it again? It's an idea worth exploring, especially when supporters argue that tariffs could create fiscal space to lower taxes while reviving the country's industrial base. But the world has changed. Modern supply chains, global trade agreements, and consumer expectations make tariffs a far more complex economic tool than they were in the past. The question is, do tariffs still make economic sense today, or do they create more problems than they solve? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer, and don't skip any part. Every second of this breakdown matters. The economic trade-offs of tariffs. While tariffs can protect domestic industries by shielding them from foreign competition, they almost always come at a cost, and that cost is often passed directly to businesses and consumers. Take the 2018 U.S. tariffs on washing machines, for example. At first glance, the policy seemed beneficial, aiming to support American manufacturers. However, studies found that the entire cost of the tariffs was passed on to consumers, leading to significant price hikes. In fact, prices increased by more than the tariff itself, a phenomenon caused by domestic manufacturers taking advantage of reduced foreign competition to raise their prices as well, even though they weren't directly subject to the tariffs. What was meant to protect an industry ended up indirectly taxing consumers, forcing households to pay hundreds more for essential appliances. The ripple effects of tariffs extend beyond consumer goods and into critical industries that rely on imported materials. The 2018 tariffs on steel and aluminum were a prime example of this. While intended to support U.S. steelmakers, these tariffs dramatically increased production costs for industries that heavily depend on these raw materials, including automakers, construction firms, and machinery manufacturers. Companies faced higher input costs, which squeezed profit margins, reduced investments, and in many cases led to job losses in sectors that weren't directly protected by the tariffs. Some companies were forced to lay off workers or relocate operations to remain competitive, ultimately causing a net negative impact on U.S. manufacturing employment. In some cases, the damage to downstream industries outweighed the gains experienced by the protected sector, highlighting the unintended economic trade-offs of tariffs. Beyond domestic impacts, there's also the issue of retaliation from trade partners, which can create even broader economic consequences. Countries affected by U.S. tariffs often respond with tariffs of their own, targeting key American exports. Following the 2018 U.S. tariffs, China imposed levies on American agricultural products, particularly soybeans, pork, and other major farm exports. As a result, demand for U.S. agricultural goods plummeted, putting immense financial strain on American farmers. To mitigate the fallout and prevent an economic crisis in rural America, the U.S. government had to step in, spending $61 billion on direct financial support for farmers between 2018 and 2020. Ironically, this amount nearly wiped out the revenue gained from tariffs on China, making the entire trade war a costly and inefficient way to support domestic industries. Instead of creating a long-term economic advantage, it turned into a fiscal burden, forcing the government to redistribute taxpayer dollars to offset the damage caused by its own policy. The economic fallout: how U.S. tariffs will reshape Canada and Mexico's economy. Now that the U.S. has officially imposed sweeping tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada, the economic consequences for North America are set to unfold rapidly. These tariffs, which include a 25% levy on key imports like automobiles, steel, and agricultural products, will disrupt the deeply integrated trade relationships that have defined North American commerce for decades. For Mexico, the impact is particularly severe in the automotive sector, where over 80% of vehicle exports go directly to the U.S. With tariffs in place, U.S. automakers will face higher costs for Mexican-made parts and vehicles, reducing demand, forcing production cuts, and triggering job losses in Mexico's manufacturing hubs. Agriculture will also take a hit, as Mexico's key exports, fruits, vegetables, and processed foods, become more expensive in the U.S. market, leading to reduced sales and financial strain on Mexican farmers. Adding to the economic turbulence, the Mexican peso is already weakening due to market uncertainty, increasing import costs, and fueling inflation, which will reduce consumer purchasing power domestically. For Canada, the tariffs present a multi-industry economic shock that will ripple through its key export sectors. The energy industry, one of Canada's largest contributors to GDP, will feel immediate pressure as Canadian oil and gas exports face higher costs, potentially leading to lower revenues, production slowdowns, and job losses. The manufacturing sector, particularly in steel, aluminum, and lumber, will also experience a sharp decline in U.S. demand, leading to plant closures and rising unemployment. Economists are already warning that these tariffs could push Canada into a recession within 6 months, as consumer spending, business investment, and export activity all decline simultaneously. As expected, both Canada and Mexico are retaliating with their own tariffs on U.S. goods, further escalating economic tensions. Canada has announced 25% tariffs on $155 billion worth of American products, targeting everything from agriculture to industrial goods, which could raise prices for U.S. consumers and businesses. Mexico is expected to follow suit, imposing tariffs on American corn, dairy, and meat exports, a move that could severely impact U.S. farmers who rely heavily on these markets. This back-and-forth trade war risks disrupting North America's highly efficient supply chains, leading to higher costs, lower economic growth, and increased uncertainty for businesses across the region. The bigger picture is clear. These tariffs may not just be a short-term policy shift, they could fundamentally alter North American trade and investment for years to come. If businesses lose confidence in the stability of U.S. trade policy, we could see a long-term relocation of production and supply chains away from North America to alternative regions like Southeast Asia, Europe, or even South America. What was once a seamless, integrated North American economy under the USMCA may now be unraveling, with tariffs driving a wedge between these long-standing economic partners. The question is no longer whether these tariffs will cause economic pain. It's how long it will take to recover from them and what permanent damage they will leave behind. Long-term effects. Can tariffs create sustainable growth? In the short run, tariffs function as a hidden tax on consumers, driving up prices without explicitly raising taxes. Since businesses importing goods are forced to pay higher costs, they often pass these costs directly onto consumers, making everyday items more expensive. This can lead to reduced consumer spending, inflationary pressures, and economic slowdowns, particularly when tariffs apply to essential goods. However, the long-term question remains: can tariffs successfully drive economic independence and strengthen domestic industries? One of the most widely cited success stories of tariffs is the 1964 U.S. tariff on light trucks, also known as the chicken tax. This tariff was introduced as retaliation against European trade restrictions on American poultry exports, but it inadvertently reshaped the American automotive industry for decades. By imposing a 25% tariff on imported light trucks, the policy protected domestic automakers from foreign competition, forcing international manufacturers to either pay the tariff or shift production to U.S. soil. Over time, the policy encouraged significant investments in domestic truck manufacturing, leading to job creation, industrial growth, and sustained profitability for U.S. automakers. The tariff shielded domestic producers like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, allowing them to dominate the American truck and SUV market. This protection helped maintain high wages and employment levels in U.S. auto manufacturing, making it a long-term success in terms of economic stability and industrial expansion. However, the tariff also had unintended negative consequences. By reducing competition, it limited innovation and efficiency, allowing U.S. automakers to maintain high vehicle prices without the pressure of competing against foreign manufacturers. Additionally, it distorted market dynamics, as automakers found loopholes to circumvent the tax. For example, some foreign manufacturers shipped vehicles in parts to be reassembled in the U.S., avoiding the tariff while still benefiting from American demand. The key takeaway? Tariffs must be strategic, precisely targeted, and carefully implemented to achieve long-term economic benefits. Blanket tariffs that apply to all imports can backfire, leading to higher costs, inefficiencies, and retaliatory trade restrictions from other countries. However, well-structured tariffs, particularly in critical industries like manufacturing, energy, and technology, can stimulate domestic investment, protect strategic industries, and create jobs. Ultimately, tariffs are not a one-size-fits-all solution. Their success depends on how they are applied, how industries respond, and how the global economy shifts. While some tariffs can strengthen domestic production, others may stifle competition, raise consumer prices, and trigger trade wars. A carefully balanced approach is essential to ensuring that tariffs serve their intended purpose, driving economic growth without causing long-term damage to global trade relations. Are tariffs the right economic tool? The effectiveness of tariffs depends entirely on how, when, and where they are applied. In theory, tariffs can protect domestic industries, create jobs, and reduce reliance on foreign supply chains. But in today's deeply interconnected global economy, their impact is far more complex. When applied strategically in industries where domestic production is viable, tariffs can encourage long-term growth, investment, and industrial expansion. They can shield critical sectors like manufacturing, energy, and defense, ensuring that national economies remain resilient in times of global uncertainty. However, the reality is that many industries today rely on global supply chains to stay competitive. A broad, sweeping tariff policy disrupts trade, increases production costs, and ultimately raises prices for businesses and consumers. We've already seen how tariffs on steel and aluminum, auto parts, and consumer goods have led to job losses, retaliatory trade measures, and increased inflation. In some cases, the very industries tariffs were meant to protect have suffered due to higher input costs and reduced market demand. The key takeaway? Tariffs are not a one-size-fits-all solution. They require precision, economic foresight, and careful execution to avoid triggering economic slowdowns, supply chain disruptions, or retaliatory trade wars. Rather than relying solely on protectionist policies, a more balanced approach, one that includes trade negotiations, selective tariffs, and domestic investment strategies, might be the most effective path forward. But now, the question is, are tariffs still a necessary tool in today's economy, or are they simply an outdated policy that does more harm than good? Let us know in the comments below. One thing is certain, the global economy is evolving, and every policy decision we make today will shape the future. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer to stay informed on the latest economic trends. Don't forget to check out one of the suggested videos on the screen right now for more deep dives into the biggest economic questions of our time. Thanks for being a part of our channel. We'll see you in the next one.